Maybe we should do a close-up of the video.
This is my favorite community.
Do you want to, is that seat okay? Or?
It's a hot seat.
It's a hot seat.
Oh, hang on a second. This is cool. Hold on a second. Do you hear clapping? This is cool. We're going to have a laugh track.
Let's see.
If I don't land a joke, I'll just wait and I'll either hear applause or laugh.
All right.
Okay, everybody. Let's go ahead on the count of 1 to 3. Wave. Wave. Hi. We're Boston. We're not Austin. Perfect. Awesome. Which means we got funded. Okay, go ahead.
So, why don't you just introduce yourself and let everyone here know what amazing things you've been doing.
First of all, I'm glad everybody's here. Thanks for spending time coming to events like this to learn more. I wrote a book, published it on Valentine's Day 2002 called Love is the Killer App. And I don't know if some of you have heard of that book. And the premise of the book is that we achieve success as leaders and as contributors by promoting success in other people. And step 1 is the acquisition of knowledge. You can't be a mentor unless you are first and foremost a voracious learner and an improving curator. So when people spend time to come to an event like this, and I talk to many of you with the hope of getting one takeaway, I dig that. Because when I come to content events, I come to have one new practice, or hopefully to have my perspective disrupted a little bit. So when I go to work tomorrow, I'm just a little bit better, or at the very least, I can coach somebody else back at my company on how they can be better. So thanks for coming out. Background. So I've been in sales a long time, and you guys are going to get a copy of the book when you leave. Make sure and pick one up, and I'll sign it for you. But I started out in radio when I was still in high school in the late 1970s, selling radio spots. That was easy. It was as easy as the sale could ever be. Addressable 1 or 2 decision makers, demo, pick up a check, just get an insert order. If it works, you got business. If it didn't, you got creative. I mean, what a simple business. And as my career kind of snaked along, I started to get in progressively harder businesses. So I was employee number 37 at Southwestern Bell Mobile Systems in the 1980s, and we launched cellular phones. And so I ran enterprise. You can imagine that was a really tough sale. When 1985, the phones were like $4,000 a piece in a gold briefcase. They didn't work. I sold enterprise. Sounds like a lot of SaaS stuff, doesn't it? It's fun, it's great. And then, glutton for punishment, I was an early stage employee at Mark Cuban's broadcast.com in Dallas. At the time I joined it was called AudioNet, brought audio video streaming to the web. Very exciting to be there. After we were picked up by Yahoo, I went to Yahoo, spent 5 years there, at a time where there were some really, really good operators there who are now running companies like BuzzFeed or Chegg or Shazam or LinkedIn and other such things. And I really enjoyed that time, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And for the last decade or so, I've advised companies in enterprise B2B on how to improve their closing ratio for their largest deals. And that's been my thing I've been working on lately. So there you go.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about this topic of how to deal with these stuck deals. I think we all have that experience of having a deal or a few of those that's sick in the pipeline, and you're always responding with, you know, what's going on? Just want to touch base. Just checking up. And
Yeah,
it just doesn't seem
nobody
very
wants you to check in.
Yeah, no one wants to touch
Nobody
your
wants you
base.
to check
I think
in.
that's the thing I've learned. But you know, what can actually work? And so we want to kind of dig into that. But maybe just to preface everything, it's, you have had a lot of experience kind of working on these big deals. And I want to kind of talk about some of the things that you found that were kind of innovative, that started to crack the nut of trying to get some of these larger deals from just stuck in the queue, in the pipeline forever.
Yeah, because if you don't master solving the high 6-figure, the low 7-figure deal, if you don't figure that out, you'll end up moving into a low ACV, SDR-driven, itty-bitty deal till death kind of model that I am not long on at all as an investor or as an advisor, it's very millennial friendly, of course, as an approach, because there's very little cold calling and no one says no. But it's not a strategy for long-term success for business to business or enterprise. So I believe our biggest barrier to entry are large, aggressive deals that test our capabilities to solve problems faster than the status quo or our competition. And so when I think about deals, I think about the reason they don't contract, meaning they don't move forward, is usually we're getting our butts kicked by the status quo. Because when I go in and do pipeline audit inside somebody's Salesforce or whatever CRM they use, you go inside and you look at every deal that started, it's somewhere in the sales process, they can't make a prediction on closing, or if they've made one, they're wrong. I'm telling you, 80% of the time, the deal is stuck on no decision. It's not stuck on their leaning towards one of your competitors. That's what we typically think. A lot of times if we listen to the edges of the field, that's what they're going to tell us. We need to discount. We need to customize. We need to do something very special that makes us different in the space. But really, what we have to do is build consensus. Because that's the enemy. The enemy is the status quo. The enemy is no decision. The enemy is not just what corporate executive board calls the 5.4 decision maker problem. The enemy is the fact that that number is going to get bigger and bigger as the years go by. Because it's no longer a decision maker issue, it's now a consensus issue. There's a person who uses your product. There are several people that have a stake in how that user makes technology or business process decisions. And then there's everybody else that thinks there's an expert about your space. And oftentimes, especially as you sell to enterprise, your core user doesn't want to move forward until she's sure everyone is, quote, signed off on it. Whether they literally sign a piece of paper or just say, I think that passes the sniff test for information security, that's what we've got to do is go build consensus. So a long time ago, what I figured out is if you're in an environment where you're selling a complicated product, and it's a complicated sales process with a lot of people, you've got to figure out how to increase the speed at which you solve problems. I won't do the opening story of the book because you'll read that later about where this whole don't go down alone thing happens. It goes all the way back to my days working for Cuban. But I will share one story that I think might tee this whole conversation up. So 2004, I was speaking at a Disney event for their leaders, and the other keynote speaker was Ed Catmull, President, Pixar Entertainment. I'm a huge fanboy of the movie Toy Story. I just consider the whole thing one of the most brilliant creative technology things ever, since Theranos. I'm just kidding. I remember thinking about the history of Toy Story, and I did a little of the Google before the event so I could understand more about it and be intelligent in front of Ed. But what I found out about is a guy named John Lasseter. John Lasseter, the VP of Creative at Pixar, he's the creative. He's been attributed to be the creative force behind Toy Story. He had an idea for a trade show back when Pixar was a software company. Okay, if you remember, Pixar was a software company that was founded to help the entertainment industry do a lot of things quicker, faster, kind of a Silicon Graphics type kind of thing. So anyway, Lasseter has an idea for a little, I think it was 21-second movie to show at the trade show. It would be all made in the box, first animated commercial of its time, called WALL-E. It's a little toy top, really cool. It was a hit of the Chicago trade show, big deal. A real hit with the lead investor at Pixar at the time, Steve Jobs, who really pressed Ed to make a full-length motion picture based on Lasseter's original treatment. But here was the brilliant thing. This is what I'm telling Ed, why I thought Lasseter is such a genius. I said, here's John thinking about a story. He's going to tell a coming-of-age story about a boy and his toys, but he's going to tell it from the toys' point of view, and he's going to make the toys more human than human, which is going to one-up the whole Peanuts franchise. I'm like, the whole thing was brilliant. To which Catmull turns to me and says, it was an ugly baby upon arrival. He said the idea had a lot of problems, tons of problems. The rendering time alone to make a full-length motion picture in the box at the time was probably in the decades, not in the years. We had to figure out creative solutions to synchronize servers, which really hadn't been done for this purpose before. We had funding issues. We had casting issues. We had scripting issues that were so deep They shut the movie down a year into production on Black Friday, Disney did, because they felt like Pixar didn't know what they were doing. They were trying to create a movie where the characters were more human than human, which meant that they found out quickly they had to develop 700 facial controllers for every character. He said, we got buried in the problems. He said, so I had to change the whole strategy, and he goes, this is when I learned. What is the difference between a good idea and a good team? The difference is seismic. He says you can take a great idea and give it to a bunch of knuckleheads and they're going to screw it up every time. He says you can take a problematic idea like Lasseter's Toy Story and give it to the brain trust and they'll work together as a team and they'll figure it out. He said I changed the entire way we thought about making a movie. I got us out of the vertical stack of movie makers that we had tried to create over that few-year period. You know, the script writer, the director, the producer, the editors, the animators. I said I got out of that stack and I started to go wide. And tried to bring different people in that had a different take. I brought in puppeteers. I brought in pricing experts on adult consumer. I brought in psychologists that thought about adult psychology. I brought in, he just went through the list of all these different people, puppeteers, craftsmen, and he said what I learned is that the wider you go, the faster you row, which I really love that saying. And then he turns to me, and this is the takeaway from the whole bit. He goes, Toy Story was 1,000 problems solved. And I thought about that. It was not a big idea. And since then, I've researched in creativity these myths of creativity. And the first myth of creativity is called the eureka moment, the big idea, the one that's so famous that we read about, which is often fiction. There is no apple hit you on the head big moment idea. And if it was, it had a lot of flaws. And you figured out how to solve all those flaws and tell a very romantic story about it later. Everything you do in life that's difficult is not one big pitch. It's not one Grant Cardone, I'm sorry, it's not one forceful close out of the academy. It's not one thing. It's 100 little problems solved sequentially, and it really hit me. And ever since then, as an enterprise sales leader and then as a consultant, then I said the secret to success then is that we master problem-solving skills. So actually, give me the clicker here. I want to go ahead a couple of things. I want to show something here.
Let me tee that up.
Okay, good. So for those of you that are watching on the live stream, I've parked a PDF of some of the slides we'll refer to at tinyurl.com/Boston Sanders. That's tinyurl.com/Boston Sanders. If you want to go along with me a little bit. And that's the URL for those of you in the room that want any of these slides later. Hopefully that's easy enough to remember. Okay, so a done deal in enterprise is a lot of little problems solved. And you solve those problems as you navigate what I call the levels of the sale. So let me give you my working analogy, how I think about enterprise sales. So it's like playing a video game. Got to level up. That's it. That's what contracting means now. Making it, leveling up faster than the game changes. Because if you don't level up fast enough, there's a reorg, there's an acquisition, there's a change in strategy, there's a new competitor, there's something that happens, you go back to zero. It works just like a game. I mentioned before I started in radio, when I started selling, the most popular video game was Pong. Pong is the activity management system of video gaming. It's hand-eye coordination, it's commitment to the system, handful of quarters, maybe you buy the console and have it at home and you get relentless and you figure out how to play the game, and the only degree of difficulty really is that the game gets a little bit faster. That was the core idea of original video gaming, okay? As time went by, it became multiplayer. It went from beyond shoot 'em up to highly strategy, highly storyified. Today, if you work in enterprise sales, getting to the top level, that contract level over there, that's like getting to the top of Halo. It's really difficult, and it is a multiplayer game. So the level of difficulty is that there are more problems. That's it. And the goal now is to increase the speed in which we solve the next problem in front of us. So for example, social selling is all about a hack to solve the contact level challenge that was created with things like caller ID, spam filters, no more card drop-offs, and decreasing trade show, like actual decision makers being at trade shows. So all these other things we had stopped working, so we had to figure out some new way to get to the first level, make contact, find the mobilizers if they exist, get the right information, if it's possible, for us to understand if there's a product prospect fit that we can prove, and then get to the second level. When you get to the second level, this is where a lot of sales systems are operating, the conceive level. It's like figuring out what the deal looks like. What are we going to do that creates long-term value, that's demonstrable with low cost of ownership? If you work at a bigger company, that's a question of cross-selling sometimes, combining products and people and processes. So, you're trying to come up with a conceptual deal with the framework, unless you just sell, a specific product. And then the third level, which we spend almost all of our time in training on, is the convince level. Where we're just trying to convince the customer they got to change the way they do business. And then after we do that, we convince them we're the best solution. Don't ever, one takeaway for those of you, don't ever get those reversed. The number one thing you've got to convince your client to do is to change the way they do business, because you'll never make a sale if they don't change the way they do business. Whether they're kicking out an incumbent or changing the way they solve the problem, the urgency to kill the status quo is our job and our greatest problem. And the reason it's a problem, as I'll talk about in a minute with the process, the reason we have to think so creatively is that CEB calls it 5.4 problem, IDC now calls it the 8.0 problem, 8 decision makers. 8 people that have to come to consensus for you to make a quality sale. On the average, you will get in front of only 3. If you're an amazing networker, maybe 4. But that means there's some way you're selling has to sell on its own when you're gone, and convince remote people with non-user-based agendas to change, and that's where the creative challenges come in at the convince level, and then there's the contract level. So every time we approach this, it's really all about, like Coach K says in basketball, it's about the next play. And every time we have a meeting, it's about the next play. And that's, to me, that is the cadence of the modern enterprise sale. It is not the touch. It is not the demo. Those are necessary but not sufficient. You've got to stick with that discipline. But at the end of the day, it's really entertaining. The cadence is knowing the root cause of the problem very clearly as a team and launching the next best way to solve it. Because so many sales activities I see in the field are attempts to solve a symptom, not a cause. So the first thing I talk to CEOs about in training is when somebody comes to you and says, the guy's not calling me back anymore, the answer is not having the CEO pick up the phone and call the CEO. You're trying to deal with a symptom. There's something much deeper than that leads to why you're not getting a call.
That seems to be the crux of what's going on today with a lot of challenges in enterprise sales, is that there isn't this, I think we've almost lost the ability to figure out how to convince. So really, even at a core level, we're having these conversations, and they're very, very surface-oriented. To your point, they're symptoms. I mean, what are you finding in order to get down deeper into the roots that's actually going to work? So
before I went to work for Bell Mobile Systems, I worked for a crazy old man named Ed Deming, who had gone to Japan after World War II. MacArthur sent him there to help the Japanese make a quality radio for the occupation, and he was from the Census Bureau, and he brought the Shewart cycle, Plan, Do, Check, Act. He brought a cycle of continuous improvement to Japanese manufacturing and revolutionized the world. So I, started working a little bit for him there, and that's where I really discovered a lot of what we talk about in Dealstorming about this issue, that you've got to go in and you've got to really find the root cause. So here's something they used to do in quality, and this actually comes from Kawasaki, and it spread to Toyota, and it's called the 5 Whys. I don't know if you've ever heard the 5 Whys. Use this. This will change your life in a meeting. When someone says they are not calling us back, you ask why. And you're going to guess, well, they're not calling us back because we're probably not a high priority to them and based on what they're doing. Why are we not a high priority? That is the second why. Statistically, what we've learned in quality is the 5th why, 80% of the time, will reveal the root cause. See, the example I always use for Toyota Lean, it's a famous example when they really figured out how the 5 whys can solve big problems. So they had a symptom, and the symptom was that their brake return cost was now out of control and creating a serious profit drag. And they say, why is the brake situation creating a profit drag? Because the variance between brakes is almost 8%. So almost 8% of all brakes don't match, which means that if we don't stop this, half of everything we do 5 years from now will be reworked. That's a big problem, right? So that's the first why. Well, why is there an 8% variance? Well, explaining the reason is that when the lathe cuts the brakes, there's a calibration that eventually goes out of calibration, and by the time we come in, there's an 8% differential over time because of the runs we have on brake making. Why is that calibration happening at the tune of 8%? Because we only do recalibration 90 days. Why do we only do recalibration 90 days? Because our funding was limited to a budget line item that only afforded us 90 days. We asked for 7 days years ago. Why was the budget so low? And this is the footnote. The last why reveals the problem. No one has ever presented to the board in Tokyo the cost of rework. They literally don't know what it is. So the manager puts on the next agenda item the 50% rework problem. The board immediately approves a 5-day calibration. They go from 8% to what they now call 2 sigma, which was, I guess, 30 out of 1,000,000. And it was because they found the root cause of the problem. And it was a mental exercise. You do the same thing in sales. When you're stuck, you got a symptom that's very identifiable. Now as a manager, why, until you get to the bottom of it.
But even with, we're taking that, we should talk about the kind of the manager-rep dynamic and dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
That will kind of reveal a little bit of what you talked about in Dealstorming, kind of the process. But what about the 5 whys when you're in front of the customer? Because I think a lot of us have maybe taken some lessons from the Challenger sale. Anyone's like a big Challenger sale advocate? And it seems like we may have taken some good practices and we're going in with this idea of insight. And we're pushing this insight as what we're trying to solve for, but we're missing the mark.
I'm good friends with those guys, so I have to,
Yeah.
I have to say, when I say this with nothing but love for Brent and Matt and those guys. But I think leading with insight is the perfect strategy when you must capture control of the customer conversation. Okay, we live in a world now where for many products that we sell, the customers almost 2/3 through their buying journey before we get in front of them, and most of the stuff they read is awful content marketing crap. It's written by, I'm serious, it's written by amateurs, edited by no one, never fact checked.
Yeah, I think there's been like some recent marketing content. Like I honestly believe, and I make it shot here, but I think that the state of B2B marketing from a content perspective,
It's like Alta Vista search.
Wait, I just want to raise a hand. How many people have actually sat through and read an entire white paper that your company is sending out? Well, okay, one more. So put your hand down.
See, the problem is content marketing, except for the best firms that work with the best partners. So when I say content marketing can be bad, I'm not talking about the smart people who I see, for example, working with HubSpot that have figured out the cadence for content production. But a lot, they're an exception. Yeah, they're the best. But most people put themselves on a newspaper deadline. They just never happen to hire reporters. So anyway, what's happening is that your prospects are reading bad information that either puts them in the wrong direction. So now your biggest thing is unteaching. So you go into the market, you got to unteach the customer. And I think that's what Challenger is really about. It's not leading with insight. It's leading with disruptive insights that kind of undo all the bad self-service research the prospect's been doing. The analogy I use is this. If you wake up someday and you've got some kind of spot on your arm and you can't quite figure out what it is, and you go, bless you, you go on the web and you Google slightly blue spot on my forearm, what is the first result? You're going to die, okay? And I talk to doctors about this all the time. This is the doctor's greatest challenge, is they call it the doctor internet problem. The customer's done everything but order the drug from Mexico already. They've tried that through Amazon, you know what I mean? So it's like they think that you have to unteach them. So I think the Challenger Insight is about unteaching, or the Challenger Insight is about being able to point to that part in their business process and say you're wrong so you can build a case for change. That being said, I also think it's important when we go out and sell, we try to find those mobilizers, and we have to talk a type of talk that, as Matt Dixon says, is like a dog whistle to those mobilizers, those people inside the prospect accounts that actually want to save them from themselves, and we figure out how to get them to solve that goat rodeo they currently have called supplier vendor acquisition. Because what's happened is the number of people that play on their teams has greatly exceeded their ability to lead those teams. So when they bring in the tech piece and the financial piece and the end user and the marketing person and the outside consultant from Bain, that's why I call it a goat rodeo. They never make the transition from me and my agenda to we and what we really need to buy for this company to be better. So they'd rather be stuck and die than take a chance on your product. So that's what we've got to figure out, is how do I find that mobilizer who's able to bring them all together around a consensus and arm her for success. And I think that's a very new thing for sales mentality, because we used to look for the inside champion that liked us, advocated for us, talked to us whenever we wanted, return calls quickly, and now we might have to find someone who's a little bit harder to get on the phone, but if you get her on your side, they can actually move mountains, and I think that's the new challenge.
Sure. So maybe we want to also want to open up the questions, obviously, because I think there's a lot of folks who have like some real thoughts around some of the deals that they're getting stuck with. But before we get there, I want to kind of share just like the deal storming methodology and what it's really about. Like, why can it be disruptive for advancing your deals?
So deal storming is the act of bringing together multiple perspectives to increase the speed by which you solve problems. So it's about creating, it's like brainstorming and deal making combined with a very specific process. So it's about, depending on the size of the deal, building a team appropriate to the situation that brings in non-sales think to go along with sales think to increase the level of innovative thinking. And it follows a very specific process. And before I show you the process, I'll tell you, I started using it when I worked for Cuban. It had 4 steps. We added 2 more steps at Yahoo. I added a 7th step, which I'll explain in just a minute, when I went out and did this with another 60 or so companies across 100 deals. And what we've learned is that if you move through the deal storming process, you will increase the speed, or I would say compress the sales cycle by an average of 25%. That's about 100 full process completions, about $2.5 billion deal flow. So it's a reasonable sample. It's all B2B. It's all what they call product prospect fit. There was a qualification on the front end that it was a really good fit for that prospect. So you dramatically increase the speed. And before I show you the process, I'll tell you the most amazing insight we've got from the research. It's called the power of 4. So here's another takeaway for you. We learned that when, for example, a field rep works with his or her manager. So think the rep is a hunter, the manager is a system manager, a system process protector. I'm just saying, those are perspectives. That's 2 perspectives. When they're collaborating, you see a lift in their chance of finding a solution to the present sticking point, 25%. So there is some value in conferring with your manager, unless your manager is just like a salesperson, in wolf's clothing, right? That's been promoted because they were great at sales. Then you need to go further than that. But anyway, when you get to 2 perspectives, you got a 25% lift in your success ratio. When you add the 3rd perspective, think someone in marketing that knows something about this problem, someone in delivery who has a stake in how you sold the deal, someone in pricing who understands revenue recognition. When you add that 3rd perspective, you increase your chance of solving the problem 100%. But what we learned in the research that is amazing is when you get to the 4th unique perspective, the 4th unique set of constraints, which can sometimes involve an OEM, say if you're channel, it can involve a mobilizer if you're really intimate with them. When you get to the 4th, you increase your success rate by 300%. So in the consulting client accounts, their historical average for a 7-figure product prospect fit deal, what they call a partnership deal, is around 20%. And with the deal storming process, it ran around 70%. And the reason why is because as they went wide, just like Pixar Entertainment, they brought people in who didn't know what they didn't know. And they suggested things that didn't work 3 years ago, but the world changed, so you tried them again, and it got you unstuck. And that's the insight. So very quickly, this is the process that the book outlines. So in a deal storming situation, the account executive and the manager realize they're stuck. It's a big opportunity. It's got a high degree of difficulty. The first thing they did was qualify the opportunity. Lower value, lower difficulty, smaller team. It might just be the dynamic duo or the terrific trio. As the deal becomes more significant and more difficult, the cast grows a little bit wider. As you qualify, you really want to remember there's a cost to collaboration. It really does bring in other resources. You really do use a lot of favors. So you've got to make sure that there's a need for collaboration. When you organize, and if you guys want to try this, you can try building a deal stormer on a stuck deal starting tomorrow. Just ask 2 questions. Who has a stake in the deal? And who has expertise about our problem? So who has a stake in the deal? Who has the most to win or lose based on whether we win or lose this deal? Who has the most to win or lose based on how we sell the deal? For those of you that work in companies that are technical, where you might not have the best relationship with your engineers or designers over promises of customization or service levels, that's an example of a very good person to bring to your deal storm. There's an old saying in engineering world that says, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. So these people really want to be part of the deal storm. But then there's this other issue like, who's an expert on why I'm stuck? If you've gone through this thinking process, who's done a deal like this before? Who's worked inside this industry? Sometimes that leads you back to your mobilizer, but that's how you organize. And you don't invite people to just jump on a call to talk about a deal. That sounds like work. They won't show up. They won't show up a second time. You don't ask them to come to a meeting. You ask them to join a cause. One of the things I learned back at Yahoo, and I talk to companies all the time, in sales, when you go outside of sales for collaboration help, stop selling the revenue number. Trust me, they don't care. I mean, you might have a little baby startup where everybody, such precious stock options, whatever. Most of the time, you got to find something bigger than the money. So at the time at Yahoo, we were at battle with AOL. And after the Time Warner AOL acquisition, Ted Turner was out selling and cashing in old relationships and just pissing us off on a lot of deals, and it was known around the company. So every time we'd have an opportunity, I'd hold a picture of Ted Turner and say, listen, if we don't win, this goon's gonna win. And I could get engineers and finance and content producers and everyone to play in a deal storm because we were organized around a cause. Prepare Step is the one this is the last one I'll talk about at any length, but it's the one we added that changed everything back in 2003 based on a conversation I had with a guy named Tom Kelly at IDEO Labs. Kelly explained to me the reason IDEO is so good at inventing things like the Newton, the Palm Pilot, pump soap, all the great inventions, is because they had a design brief that in just a few pages clearly outlined the problem, gave the thinking assignment customized to everyone that was coming to the meeting. They gave them 3 days to think about the brief. And so when people came to the meetings, incubation had set in, and they had a lot more clarity. They had a lot more clarity about the assumptions behind their ideas. And so people weren't as defensive when you would debate their ideas in a meeting. You see, that's what's wrong with brainstorming. The reason brainstorming is such a frustrating process is it lacks a process. You just marshal a random group of people into a room, you put a problem on them you've not thought about much, and you ask them to come up with 100 ideas on the spot. But you tell them don't debate, and the reason why Alex Osborne said that rule back in 1921 is because when people have an idea on the spot, they're pretty defensive about that idea. But let them think about it for a few days and think it through a little bit, and you can actually have some candor in a meeting. So the secret then to sales when you get stuck is if you're going to create a team, the account executive should create a deal brief that's no more than 4 pages. The goal is 3. And what the deal brief does is basically says, here's the opportunity, both revenue and higher purpose. Competition, break us into a new market, create a barrier to entry, whatever the bigger why is. Here's why I think we're stuck. And you need to think that through as much as you can. There's so many different templates you can use to find your sticking point. Then, here's what we've tried. Be very honest, AEs. Nothing unravels a team later than finding out something you did wrong that you didn't reveal in the brief. Be very honest about it. Link back to Salesforce or your CRM, depending on whether the people you're inviting can link to it. I'm a little, in that way, I'm a fan of other things like Google Docs or Dropbox because not everybody's on your CRM that you've invited to your team. And then the next part of the brief, maybe a few articles or very interesting links about what's going on with that company. It's food for thought. And then a thinking assignment. You put that brief together, you send it to anybody that you're going to have a meeting with. So if you're going to have a meeting on a stuck deal next week, schedule it for Tuesday at 10. Send the deal brief out this Thursday by lunch and hassle everyone who received it to read it and think about it over the weekend. And if they do, they will come in next Tuesday with ideas, some clarity of the assumptions behind their ideas, and you can have a debate. And you can probably figure out the next play in that meeting. And here's the other reason the deal brief is critical. As a consultant, we discovered through all of these engagements that 1 out of 5 deal storms are canceled after the AE goes through the process of doing the deal brief. Because the process of doing the deal brief revealed to them something that they had not pulled out of the existing process because they were solving the wrong problem. And having to go through this exercise illuminated the root cause for them for the first time. So love step number 4. And the rest of the process is relatively straightforward. You have meetings. The purpose of a meeting is not to dump information, to make friends, or to schedule the next meeting. The purpose of a meeting is to figure out the next play. Execution is about rapid prototyping. A prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. Execution isn't about closing the deal, it's about prototyping the idea to reduce the abstraction, to use a coding example. Then we've got to analyze how we did when we launched the prototype and be completely transparent about that. Reconsider if we've got the right team, if we still need to do this team-based or go back to standard sales process. And then we have to report to everyone we've invited to respect them. Because great problem solvers are curious, they're courageous about ideas they didn't come up with, but most of all, they respect everyone who's had a part of the process. And typically you'll do that whole process 2 or 3 times on a quality deal to get to the finish line. And you have to just be thinking all the time, sprint, faster, how do I get to the next step? And if you think like that, you're going to dramatically improve your performance in the larger complex deal category.
Yeah, I think, particularly with the pair stage, if we just did that for just all of our deals, where it had a little bit of uncertainty, like it just wasn't really put together, might actually advance the cause
It's
quite
tricky.
a bit.
If you did, but you know, it's the creeping credit of the damn TPS reports, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like the problem with CRM in general is that, you know, we say you have to do it all the time, and someone's like, well, why do I care about the future of my company? I'm just trying to get these things done. But yeah, I do think that for an AE who is very ambitious, that wants to become more self-reliant, especially on your larger opportunities, the deal brief exercise is a game changer. And if nothing else, you're enabling your manager to be a better pipeline manager. Because I mean, I think it's a real crisis right now in sales management. Is sales managers are good at managing metrics, but they're not very good at managing pipeline because they're not being given the right information. They're just given whatever the category code is and whatever the CRM is, and it's, like I said, when we get into the pipeline audits, it's a mess.
Yeah. Well, that's another whole goat rodeo to talk about maybe for another time. I want to just open up for any questions that people may have for Tim, because we can chat up here for the next 3 or 4 hours. But I want this to be an opportunity for us to kind of get some of the thoughts that are in our head about some of the deals that we might be working on, and just put it out there. And in the meantime, as people are ruminating on questions or thoughts, what have you seen that's, you know, in the deal storming process itself, as
Right.
you're actually going through?
Right.
Because, you know, you talk about the distinction between brainstorming and getting the thoughts together. I mean, have you found like that ideal number of people? I mean,
Yeah, it's one less than you think you need. The ideal number of people you need in the room is one less than you think you need.
Because
No joke.
you know, place at Siebel or Oracle, we'd have like 50 people on a conference call
Right.
to talk about a deal.
Yeah. Okay, so
It seems
that's a
insane.
very good point. I've never seen a deal storm where more than 12 people really get things done. So I think you need to limit that by having stakeholder representatives. So you don't have 15 people from marketing, you have a person from marketing that you have a relationship with. You don't have 5 people from engineering, you have a person from engineering that represents the engineering needs in that room. And when you think about meetings, think about it like an accordion. So when the Dealstorm team comes together, that's the big part of the accordion. Then when they have to go off and have meetings with engineering to decide they're going to do the work you cooked up in the Dealstorm, you as the AE are going to ride shotgun with that engineering stakeholder when they have the little meeting. Back to the meeting. That's what I also see inside organizations, especially if there's a resource ask, a customization ask, or something like that that happens after the meeting. So if the marketing person has an idea, we're going to do this great video thing, a career builder did that, for example, then the AE, she had to go meet with marketing a few times so she could transfer that urgency, that why behind it all, and really, you know, get the commitment for the execution. Yes?
Just a question on what are the ground rules for that deal storming environment? I've been in deal
cool.
reviews,
Good question.
but
Yeah.
what other ground? Because I've seen sometimes marketing people turns into let's stump the chump and confuse, you know, see what the salesperson doesn't know. Some folks like to take shots at salespeople. So if you have any,
So yeah, it's good
It's like the personal vendetta in the
Stephen's
meeting.
uncovered some really interesting things here. So first of all, the reason more AEs don't deal storm is because it's like playing with live ammunition. You're never going to get in this much trouble with a client, right? When you gather together 6 of your VPs to have a strategic thing, and if it goes to hell in a handbasket, it's a pretty embarrassing moment, which, by the way, is why I want AEs to run this, because it is the ultimate leadership growth opportunity. These people that I worked with that ran deal storms went on to run companies, because that's where you learn the cadence of running a meeting, and that's what it takes to be a CEO. But I digress. So here are some of the rules we developed over time. The first rule of the Dealstorm meeting is ideas can come from anywhere. It's a very critical rule that you lay on the table. Here's why. There's people that are going to walk into the room that have no expertise about this area, but they also don't have the same constraints we do. So their ability to freely associate things is dramatically higher than ours. It is extremely likely that the market's moving so quickly, a person who doesn't know what they don't know just may have beginner's luck. By the way, beginner's luck is that idea of someone who comes to a meeting without the same "it will never work here" thinking that all the veterans have, and that's why they get lucky and come up with a hack. But anyway, first rule is ideas come from anywhere, and you really have to enforce that as the AE. And the reason I say that I have to stop here and pause is today with the light bulb, one of the most enduring inventions associated with Edison was the light bulb that screws into the light bulb fixture, okay? Edison did not invent a single thing on his own. He signed 10,000 patents. He had a lab full of scientists that developed all of his inventions. He led what they called collision, something that Steve Jobs famously championed as an idea. But the reason that we screw in a light bulb today is because a janitorial assistant at Edison Labs once watched Thomas Edison screw back on the turpentine can after cleaning his hands when working on a machine. So in the back of the room while he was cleaning, the janitor heard the engineers a few weeks later talking about the light bulb falling out of the fixture problem. They tried tying it in with pieces of leather, it caught on fire. They tried burlap string, it caught on fire and didn't work. To which the janitorial assistant says, why don't we do it like the turpentine can? To create a lathe and then a reverse lathe pattern and it just screws in. And then 5 engineers turned around and said, shut up, you're a janitor, right? To which Thomas Edison said, that's the first time it was, ideas can come from anywhere. In fact, the best ones come from the strangest places. I demand you, he picks a guy, build me a prototype within 2 months, because they didn't have sprints back then. And that's where it came from. So as a leader in a meeting, ideas come from anywhere, number one. Number two is we will stay on agenda. We're going to stay on agenda. So the Dealstorm meeting is, agenda item number 1 is discussion of the problem, and it's 15 minutes. 15 whole minutes to have a debate about the root cause of the problem. Hardest thing you'll ever go through, most illuminating part of the meeting. Then there's 30 minutes for us to go through the opening and the narrowing and the closing part of finding the next best play. And then the last part of the meeting is about assignment of work and commitments. And then if you want to hack for this, because you know the marketing guy's going to come in and say, well, I've got a problem with you guys back on the brochure campaign from 6 years ago. You're going to have a flip chart or one of the whiteboards, and it's going to be called issues. It's mostly for people who have issues. Get it? It's called issues. So as a facilitator, it's easy for you to deflect everything that isn't part of the problem discussion, the solution discussion, or the next steps discussion to the issues board, and then cover it off in the last 5 minutes and stick to it. And then the third rule of the Dealstorm is no distractions. And that's not just about ringing things and people on, it's side conversations. If you think the meeting after the meeting is bad, the meeting during the meeting is the one that unravels it. And one of the best ways as an AE you can break that up is if David and Stephen are having a meeting during my meeting about a finance integration with engineering, while they're talking, I'm just going to go stand between the two of them until they stop talking. You got to use social pressure. Again, it's a great way for you as an AE to develop a little bit more leadership quality. And then the fourth ground rule is that we are going to act on facts and we're going to research hunches. So it's okay for us to get excited in the room about an next play that's based on a hunch, but the execution step then comes down to verification before prototyping. So those are the 4. And then if I've got, like I work with this one defense contractor, I can't say their name, I'm in Boston. Anyway, I worked with this really big defense contractor on a missile deal. And they had such political BS inside the company. The CEO who brought me in said, if we can just get the first win in that first Dealstorm meeting, we just may change everything. Because we haven't had a first win in any of these meetings. And so I kind of borrowed an old facilitation rule to have the group co-author the 5th rule based on what makes them crazy in meetings. And it worked like a charm. You know, basically the first rule was that get rid of guys like me. No one speaks for more than 2 minutes on a specific answer. Believe it or not, that was what made them all crazy in meetings. That's why their meetings were 3 hours long. So they co-authored that rule, and we had our first victory, and we built on it for the rest of the meeting. But I will say one other thing. Last thing I got to say, build relationships long before you need them in the company. Like if I had to point back to what I did at Yahoo from the first day I showed up in 1999, I made the decision never to eat lunch with sales. Because the break room looked like something at a Clueless, where everybody sat together in little cliques, engineers and creatives and marketers and sales. So every day I'd eat with a different table, take my lumps, because at the time our sales group was making everybody crazy, and find opportunities to do favors for other groups. So I invested a lot of time doing a lot of favors, and eventually I had a friend in every department, and that happened to be my stakeholder, and we had better Dealstorm meetings, and once we started to win, people knew that screwing up a Dealstorm meeting will cost us millions. So that's another way to hack that situation.
And I think kind of to add on to that point, is also recognizing people who are participating in Dealstorms, who participate in Deal, and sharing that recognition. What generally happens, you have the big deal, you close it, everyone's like, yay, good work. And then that's it. That's like one person gets all the recognition.
So that's great. That's a great one. So in the book I talk a lot about that. The second myth of creativity is there's no lone genius. With the exception of Tesla himself, and that's still debatable. No great thing has ever been built by one person. Ever, ever, ever. It's been debunked. There's books, like read the book called The Myths of Creativity or Beyond the Myth of Genius, and they systematically, we don't have time, it goes through and just debunks all the myths we've been raised, from Darwin to Eli Whitney to you name it. It's always been a team sport. There's always been a figurehead that we want to attribute it to, so it's easier for society to accept it, but everything's done by groups. So what we have to make sure we're doing in a Dealstorm is to never give credit to an individual for having an idea. That's where the danger sets in. What we do is we look at pods or little execution teams. So the ideator might be working with the prototype builder, might be working with the mobilizer whisperer, might be working with the research person, and those four have hatched that you report on the efforts of those four.
Right.
And you always make sure that as you build a team, you have to understand every idea in the beginning that has never been done before is pretty stupid, but it can get pretty smart with a lot of iterations. And so if you make sure and always give that distributed credit, you'll have less hurt feelings, or as I like to call it, you'll have less Jane's addiction scenario, where Perry takes half of everything and the two good guys quit. So the reporting piece and giving group culture is really, really critical.
Yeah. Jane's Addiction was such a good band.
It's a great band. Like the publishing deal killed. I lived in LA for a long time, and the publishing deal killed the band. I mean, the reason Eric A. left the band was because Perry got all credits for lyrics, which is 50% of publishing, and those guys didn't know that, and Perkins didn't care, and he was a drummer, he didn't care. But the other two guys cared a lot, and that ruined the band. But it just
horrible downfall. The wiles of the music business, maybe that's another topic for later. David, you had a question.
So if you think about a big deal, 8 decision makers, other influencers, there's 100 objections you have to overcome and 100,000 questions you need to answer to get the facts. How did you manage, there's going to be a lot of gaps in knowledge. You're trying to understand the 5 whys, and oftentimes you don't know. So how did you deal with maybe it's a question of you work on more qualified deals in a deal circle than you do deals that where you don't have information. But I'm curious how you dealt with that.
If you have the only qualification we look for, besides it being a larger deal, was a strong sense of product prospect fit. So we had a strong sense based on our internal work that this product would produce outsized value for the customer if they could solve their problems and buy it. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. But when we did qualify for product prospect fit, we did find it was easy to find, if not mobilizers, inside champions on the other side. Because if the product prospect fit's pretty good, there's certain people in that prospect company who are dying on the inside that they're not fixing it. And it's just, if you find them, they can lead you to what we call the stages, that can give you all the information. I think the other thing too is networking. So in a lot of situations, I noticed that people were able to find deal mentors through LinkedIn who'd sold to similar companies. There's one of the examples in the book about how oftentimes we get tripped up on information security, say on a SaaS sale. It's really hard because the CISO does not come to these meetings. They do not have a brief that's distributed about their perspective about security, because that's anti-security by its nature, so it's really, really hard to get to those cats. So a lot of times you've got to go find a deal mentor who's sold to that person or a look-alike persona of that person, and you're going to have to, it's almost like what we call remote research. like remote viewing. It's remote research where you're kind of creating a lookalike category of what do we think the whys are based on a similar situation and a deal mentor who's been through this before. It's not 100% accurate, but it's wildly more accurate than just trying to solve the last symptom. Yeah.
So you do the deal storm, and it goes to execution, and it's close lost. How do you do it again? What's the second time? What's the second deal storm look like when you don't win that first deal?
It really depends on how much time was invested in that deal.
Yeah.
What I often find is that when you go into a culture, you want to find one that's pretty large, but it's got 1 or 2 identifiable sticking points, not 100. And you want to pick one you've got a high degree of winning on because you want to develop momentum inside a culture. So you really want to start with one that's relatively close. But I've been in ones where we go in, do a huge introduction, the first one failed. I think the quality of the postmortem and how honest and transparent we are about it is really critical to having the second one. The other thing I tell you too is that sometimes I think you got to do deal storms under the radar when you start inside a culture. So it's not this formal thing like we're going to put, like people when I work with one company put posters up when they form a deal storm, but that's because they've been doing it for a few years and they were trying to create that enthusiasm. I would go into some companies and they would do it on the down low in the beginning because they weren't gobbling up a lot of resources. The meetings were all in-house. Yes, they were going to marketing and engineering, but that wasn't really outside the boundaries of their culture. They just didn't do it because who wants to work in the land of no or the land of slow? But they did it, and they did it under the radar, and they won some, they lost some. But here's what happened. Every time they did it, whether they closed the deal or not, they found a tweak to the existing sales process. They came up with a new like device in the convince stage brainstorming to better explain their service in a way the prospect could repeat to somebody else. So they'd always find some little piece of sales innovation. I gotta say, I've not seen any culture that went from 0 collaboration to first deal storm that didn't get enough value out of the first process to be kind of addicted to it. Because then later, when they operated with just the sales staff behind them, especially on complex deals, they really felt like they were playing in the dark. But that, for a leader, that is something you have to manage very well. Just like anything else you launch in sales role. If it fails in the beginning, it's a big deal.
You made a comment earlier about how sales managers' behavior, and you were talking about some superficiality. I don't think it's fair to say like, oh, nothing's being done right in sales these days. But I do think what you're getting at is not so unique to any particular deal or even big deals. There's something general that you're speaking about in terms of being problem solvers and being value added to customers and really being not creative but responsive. Like of course you want to be creative, but like, are you really listening? Are you actually trying to solve the problem? Or are you trying to sell something? Because I guarantee if you try to solve the problem, you're going to sell a lot more than if you try to sell something. So how do we combat that mentality, that cookie cutter, sales process focused mentality? Oh, we're on message, we're winning. Like that doesn't even work in the real world that I see a lot of these days.
I think a lot of it is compensation's a part of it, but also how an organization would choose sales managers is a big deal. I mean, I'll use football for example. If the NFL chose coaches like B2B chooses sales managers, we'd have the same problem with the sport, okay? Because you'd have a bunch of superstar contributors who went from having a lot of fun with one-handed catches to now having to manage everything from the salary cap to roster cuts to the playbook. And they do it because they have to, but they don't want to. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the last 50 years of sales management development. I think leaders of companies and startups must understand that sales managers aren't always salespeople. Because what happens is you take the salesperson who's really good at the sales process, and we say, okay, now good news, you're going to own everybody else's sales process. And you make them a matrix person. They literally become a spreadsheet jockey. They cannot not be that. And we set up a compensation plan that rewards that. I think if we start looking for problem solvers, people that have been very good in project management, people that show a unreasonable tenacity around large quality, complicated deals, I think you're going to find that type of sales manager who not only is very good at fostering problem solving, this gets back to something that we were going to talk about, they also help convert rep level creativity into actual sales performance. It's like one of the most amazing things that I ran across in researching Dealstorming was a study done by Aston Business School in the United Kingdom. And they studied a huge sales force. And what they discovered is that the only relationship between creativity in a salesperson and their actual sales performance had to do with the strength of their relationship with their direct manager. If they weren't on the inner circle with a strong relationship, they could be Mozart and they would still miss their number. They could be a wildly creative person and they'd still not be able to get unstuck. And what the research basically says is that innovation happens at the relationship exchange, where managers give latitude in exchange for competence and continual learning to reps, because salespeople want latitude more than anything. Research is really clear on this. They want the freedom to do things the way they want it. And so the manager has to enter that relationship saying, as long as you spend a lot of time increasing your competency, so that when you zag, you don't break the sales process. Increase your competency so that when you sell something, it's still profitable and executable and scalable. If you increase competency, I'm going to reward that with latitude. And on the flip side, if you demonstrate loyalty to my goals as a manager, which hopefully are aligned with the enterprise, if you demonstrate loyalty, I will support you when you make a mistake. And so it's an axis, and it goes like this: latitude for competence, support for loyalty. When that gets installed, the Aspen Business School found there was a direct relationship. So that's the secret inside sales management culture, simply to make that inner circle bigger, to put more of it into the weekly conversation about what are you doing to increase your confidence about our product, how the product interacts with the market, what's going on with the market, etc. I think that's a big part of how we develop that innovative problem-solving mindset. It doesn't just happen.
I want to take one last question here in the center. Lewis?
Yeah, so at Google they did research on what made teams successful. And they
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and they found it wasn't necessarily the teams that had the brightest people or met a certain frequency or things like that.
Empathy.
It was teams that everybody had an almost equal chance to share in and participate in the meetings. So this goes beyond good ideas can come from anywhere. This goes to the point of, as you said, empathy, but also making sure that everybody is participating and that one or two people aren't talking 50 or 60% of the time. And so I'm wondering, in your process, if you've seen things to make sure that everybody on the team is contributing and that a few people aren't dominating.
Yeah, in the book we have a chapter on the meeting management. That's a big part of it. It has to do with not only how you run the meeting, but how you also distribute the work so that people, those that are a little bit more introverted and quiet, they speak with their work. So you have to kind of figure out the desire of that individual to contribute, the style in which they're comfortable to contribute. And as an AE, this is why it makes you grow up to be a CEO, managing that room for balance. But I think that what's interesting about the Google research, which when I read it, I just loved it, is that the reason everybody got a voice wasn't so much to increase the number of ingredients on the table. That's what most of us would think. The reason everyone had a voice is because it changed chemical flow in the room. And it gets back to that idea that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. If the manager of that meeting made sure that every single person, by watching their faces that wanted to speak, had a chance to express themselves, every single person, like part of the execution, had a chance to be there, people were literally smarter in the meeting. So HeartMath looked at this, and what they said is that when you're in a meeting and you're shut out, you have a cortisol reaction, and it dramatically lowers your brain leverage capacity. You're not going to leverage 10% of your brain, you're going to leverage 2 or 3%. That's like when you're free, when your manager's a screamer, that happens to you all the time too. But when you're in a meeting and you feel like you have a voice, when you feel like you're being heard, when you feel like that the way you feel and the job you do is being respected, instead of producing cortisol, your body produces an enzyme called DHEA. A lot of people take DHEA for mental clarity, but the body produces it when inspired by inclusiveness and empathy. It increases your brain leverage capacity to up to 30%. So I remember Eric Schmidt once talked about Google versus Yahoo, and I remember he had this awful thing. He said that it was chemical warfare. That's what he meant. That they managed a culture that produced more hope and inspiration and inclusiveness and being heard than we did, and it changed chemical flow, and it led to a lot more problem-solving skills. I think that's a big part of that study too.
Well, thank you so much, Tim.
Cool.
I think let's give a round of applause.